welcome back to episode 5 of Arcanum Theurgy. I'm Dan Rasanowski.
I'm Joseph Schaefer. Today we're going to talk about Hermetic Salt and Niter, the symbols, and a bit of a context about them. So we're going to probably go from a macro to micro. Dan will just take over first with an overview, intro to just salt generally in, physical form and in the occult and just the broadest context, and then I'll give like a hermetic alchemical aspects of it. So Dan, if you want to just take it away.
So, salt in the occult. What is salt? Salt is a compound consisting of two other compounds. You got sodium and chlorine, which both of those compounds together make salt. And these do have properties, both spiritual and physical, when you combine them both. Pythagoras actually had said himself that salt was an emblem for justice, for it preserves all things and prevents corruption. So kind of going into the whole thing about salt,
the preserving aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Its
property of preserving.
Preservation.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So justice preserves whatever it animates. He then suggested, too, since, he thought it was so important, he said, he suggested that a salt cellar be placed on the table at every meal as to remind men the emblematic virtue of it. Just how, important it is. Like, look at this.
Yeah.
Remember this.
Right.
Yeah. So, when you're using salt in any sort of form, whether it be, for spiritual purposes or purposes of rituals, it is said that it is best used for the best form of it is an iodized salt, like table salt. You want to use either sea salt or kosher salt because the iodization can...
Well, it's not pure.
It's not pure, yeah. Exactly. So you just want to avoid it because...
Well, and kind of going into the alchemical aspect, they always say you want to work with the purest thing, like you're supposed to boil everything down to its purest aspect so that you can work with it.
Absolutely.
So similar, I guess, with salt in the occult is...
You want the purest form.
Yeah, you don't want like a manufactured, like
chemically
treated,
mass-produced, bleached. Yeah, exactly.
Something that arises naturally out of the sea and all the salt flats, so that type of thing.
Yes, you can get it from there too. Salt flats, it's natural. So speaking of that, you said the salt flats and all of that. It's used in its physical form, to represent Earth on an altar. So if you have an altar and it's either to I guess you could say an altar to something, you want to have a meaning, you put salt on there to represent Earth. So it has its own meaning within itself. It's not just salt is salt. Salt can mean Earth, too, which I'm sure that probably comes up in the alchemical. Not necessarily as Earth, but it has its own...
That will come up to some extent. There is a tie, but I'm also being reminded of that saying, I think it's in Matthew. Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth. There's that, and there's the Rolling Stones song, Salt of the Earth.
Yeah, speaking of that, before I go any further with any of this, salt is mentioned, I do believe, no less than 64 times within the Bible. Okay. So it does come up quite a lot. I think there's a story, I think it's Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, she turns into a pillar of salt.
Yeah. So salt comes up again. It's something where you see it all over. Salt is. It's just the symbols and these meanings are present throughout all of history.
You know what? One day we should do a really heretical, historically anachronistic episode about biblical sort of, because Julius Evola references interestingly the Bible and how certain parts of it seem to be kind of. Hermetic,
like they pull
an
from
alchemical,
Hermetic
or you can read certain things, stories or psalms or sayings in a Hermetic context,
and that's something that I'm pretty sure people don't even know.
Yeah, well, there's a whole book called The Jewish Alchemists too, where I believe there's long sections where they talk about people in the Old Testament that they suspect were like alchemists. And there's references to metals throughout that they can be viewed through that lens and that type of thing. So that could be an interesting episode, maybe just when we want to take a break from pure symbolism, for a bit. But that would take some research. But
of course.
That could be something to pipe. I'd be more than willing to do that.
I mean, we got a Bible, so we can definitely dig through it and
got a couple of them. Yeah.
So that'd be interesting. I'd like to do that too. So, we talked about, what is salt, what it consists of. Pythagoras, who mentions that it is quite an important compound physically. And then we have here what salt does in its physical form for these rituals, for these things that you would want to do with it. Because of its molecular structure, it's cubed, it traps energy. So, that's why people use it to protect or to keep stuff out. So if you're So if you're doing a ritual, you put salt in a circle around where you're doing the ritual, and it absorbs the negative energy, specifically negative energy. It doesn't do positive energy, which is interesting. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, that is interesting. That'd be cool to delve into a little bit at some point.
Yeah, so exactly, because I don't know how it differentiates or what the quote-unquote science is behind it. But it absorbs negative energy. It does not repel. Some people think that salt repels spirits or it keeps them away.
So it kind of locks them?
It locks them in place.
It's not a force field, per se. Perhaps.
Exactly. Maybe they see the salt and it would keep them away, but it doesn't just repel them. They will get trapped within the salt, these negative energies, these spirits. They will get trapped in the salt, and then what you're supposed to do is literally sweep them up and dump it. Like, you sweep them up and you dump it and get rid of it.
Okay.
So it's kind of like not
a ritual salt site, like a dumping site, trap spirits. Ooh, that could be a good thing for like a scary movie. Like, instead of an Indian burial ground, just like a house is built on top of like a salt heap.
Mound.
Yeah, where like occultists for centuries were dumping like salt cubes that had or spirits trapped in them or something. Can I mention just something interesting too? As I was reading the Evola book with the UR group, the group, Introduction to Magic, and one of the writers was talking about when you sort of like astrally project. I think I remember telling you about this. When you astrally project while you're awake, it's best to do it within a circle of salt because you're leaving your vessel of your body open to intrusion by demons, perhaps. He did say, interestingly though, if you do it while you're asleep, like astrally project while you're asleep, you're safe because there's spirits that watch over you while you're asleep.
Oh, that's interesting.
You would think maybe the opposite.
Yeah, like you'd be more vulnerable.
But I guess while you're awake, that active principle of your body perhaps can be usurped by the demon, or I don't know,
demon or negative spirit,
wild stuff.
Hey, you're telling me. So yeah, you put the salt around where you want to protect, or where maybe you have a spirit in your house or whatever. You put it down, it gets absorbed into the salt, and then, like I said, you're literally supposed to sweep it up and go dump it somewhere and get rid of it. And then it can also be applied to a more personal aspect, in the sense that you can put it on your skin. You put it on your skin with certain oils, or even just by itself, and what it does is it absorbs personal negative energies, and then again you wash it off. So you would do it when you're bathing. You would use salt to draw all these toxins out, these negative energies, and then you. Well,
that even goes on to the day, even like among it's like a status thing. Like if you get like soap from the Dead Sea or something, because it's so salty you can just float in there. So yeah, same even to this day, similar type thing.
So yeah, that also being said, I'm sure the Dead Sea is some very sacred site.
Oh, it's gotta be.
Yeah, to somebody here.
I haven't come across it in any readings yet, but I'm sure. Well, you know how life is funny too. Sometimes you now that I said it, we'll probably see it like in a couple
all
places.
Over the place. What I mean? Yeah.
So.
So yeah, you can use it on yourself. Take all the negative energies out of you and wash it off. And then there's two kinds of salt. Well, there's more, but there was two that I found.
That comes through mine too. Even hermetically, like symbolic, there's many different kinds.
Many different kinds, yeah. So I only wrote down two because those were the most prevalent, I suppose. Okay. And there's black salt, and then there's two kinds of black salt. Excuse me. There's two kinds of salt, but they're black salts. There's black lava salt. And then there's Himalayan black salt. Okay. So what the black lava salt is, it's created by combining sea salt specifically and charcoal. What the salt does is, as I just said, it absorbs the negative energies and the spirits and all of that sort of thing. It traps it within itself. But the charcoal absorbs toxins. So you combine the two together, it's kind of like you remove negative energy, you remove toxins from the body. So you're combining this very sacred, I guess you could say, substance with a more practical sort of substance. Because we use charcoal all the time. It's used in filters, it's used as utensils, all kinds of things. And you combine them together, and it pulls everything out of you, combining those two together, which I thought was interesting. And that's how you create black lava. I'm not too sure how they combine it. I think there's like Hawaiian black salt where they use like a mortar and pestle and they smash coconuts and lava rock and salt together in like a,
I want to say I've seen like what it looks like, but just somewhere on the internet or something. I never delved into
it. Yeah. Well, I mean, you really never had a reason to.
Yeah.
But so with that being said, there's a lot of practical uses for it. It's not necessarily just spiritual, even though it has very strong spiritual connotations. It can be used as a practical sense. It's very medicinal. A lot of places use it as a medicine, and that brings me to the Himalayan black salt, which it's an Ayurvedic. I don't know if I'm saying that right. In Ayurvedic medicine, it's considered a cooling spice, and it's used for digestive problems that includes heartburn, constipation, bowel trouble in general. So it's got a spiritual aspect, and then it also has its, physical, medical aspect. And it's very important throughout all cultures. If you look up salt...
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, black salt, any kind of salt, you'll see going all the way back to ancient times that it is an extremely important medicinal or sort of... what's the word I'm looking here for? It's medicinal. It's a medicinal,
okay.
Yeah. That's all I'm trying to say. It's got a ton of different uses, medicinal, kind of relaxing. Get the Himalayan salt lamps.
Yeah, right.
Where they're like orange and you put a light in it. It's supposed to promote relaxation. So all of that stuff. Before I just say medicinal 8 more times.
Yeah. It's medicinal, really.
Yeah. So, and then I also talked about this already. You use it in rituals. People put it in rituals, use it around rituals to keep negative energies out, to keep negative spirits out who want to ruin the ritual. Because, like I said, the negative it absorbs negative energy. So no matter what, only the good energies, the good spirits are going to come in, and the bad ones are going to be blocked out. So that's why you always see, well, not always, but there's cases where when you're doing a ritual, you make a circle out of salt. You make the whole thing out of salt, and it does what you want it to do. But that is the more physical aspect of it. Yeah, practical, both spiritually in rituals and medicinally. But now I'm going to pass it to you, Joe, and you're going to tell us all about the Hermetic salt and its symbol.
Sure. Yeah. So I think a lot of what I have, a lot of what you said will sort of come through echo rhyme, perhaps even with this sort of more symbolic aspect of salt.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to describe the actual symbol itself that is used to represent salt in like Hermetic texts and stuff. It's a circle with a horizontal line going right across the middle of it. So it just cuts it into 2 halves, basically. So from what we know from our previous episodes, we can see that, as Julius Evola describes, this circle with the horizontal line in it represents stagnant prima material. The circle being the prima materia, and the horizontal line in it representing passivity or stagnation. Oswald Wirth provides an explanation of the symbol in Hermetic symbolism and its relations to alchemy and Freemasonry. And also Don Antoine Joseph Pernetti points out in his Mystical Hermetic Dictionary, like we just said, that there are many different kinds of salt, and he lists a lot of them. Wirth notes this as well, but explains to us that the symbolically named marine salt, so kind of like we were just saying with the sea, like naturally occurring, the marine salt is the most indispensable and widespread.
Mm-hmm.
He explains that the horizontal line in the circle separates the cosmic ocean, dividing it into superior or upper and inferior or lower waters. He elaborates, quote, "We are no longer in the presence of indeterminate chaos in an abstract sense, to which no quality could be attributed. The horizontal bar that traverses the zero, or circle, endows it with the value of a substance, stressing that substance, no longer sensible but intelligible, unquote. It is here that he also admits that it's difficult to translate what these symbols are meant to incite one to conceive of, so he's just kind of doing his best, you know. And it's that's another thing too, that's like the symbols they're kind of intuitive, you know. But since like so long, modern people have kind of lost so much of their intuition, we kind of have to try and translate the symbols and learn about them in that way, you know, which is what we're doing. So Wirth wraps up his section on salt by explaining that for the Hermeticists, chaos manages or gets by because of the separation of the subtle from the thick or heavy. From this results the creation of sky and earth, or heaven and earth, the initial act of Genesis. So again, biblical stuff here. He ends saying, quote, all that exists thus has its sky and earth, as the sign for salt indicates, unquote. So top half and lower half.
Sky and earth.
As above, as below, even too, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, so again, like salt, something that seems just so simple, really is a powerful symbolic substance.
And everyone has salt. I mean,
basically.
Yeah, and even
it's
though
in your
it is,
body even too.
Yeah,
you know?
and even though it's iodized and it's like the garbage,
yeah,
you still have it, and it's still salt. So it's funny, like you just said, how people have just like kind of just see it now as a mundane object, when in reality it's got all these, you know, big meanings to it and symbolisms behind it.
Right.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah. So just getting back to it, Julius Evola writes in the Hermetic tradition, quote, this is the state of petrifaction, arrest, suspension, and stagnation devoid of life. It is the body element in the widest sense, where the gold, although present, is as restricted in its power as the opposite principle to which it has reacted, unquote. He also writes that, quote, salt expresses the physical state or world interpreted as a state or world in which the corpses of invisible battles of cosmic interferences between powers are precipitated. Here the body is equivalent to the sepulchre or prison, the symbolic rock to which Prometheus has been chained in order to purge the unfortunate failure of the Titanic audacity, equivalent to the act of possession, to the primordial individuation that did violence to the goddess, unquote. So there's that real dense Evolian language.
Yeah, that Titanic audacity.
Yeah, that'd be a good band name.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically what you can just kind of take from that in the broadest sense is that salt is kind of related to the idea of the body. And it, even though like you're supposed to move past the materialism of the body, you have to understand that it's needed.
Yeah.
The body, salt, is connected to the spirit and the soul, and Mercury is what binds all them together. We can get into the whole tripartite thing. Oswald Wirth writes very interesting stuff about that.
Well, isn't like this, like salt in alchemy is you use it to break down essentially the garbage. Like it's used as that sort of agent, correct?
Kind of. From what I understand, although once we get into like more of the practice stuff, I'll have to review a lot of that. But I think there's probably some truth to that. But also, it's kind of like the bedrock for the alchemical work.
That's kind of what I was saying. Like,
you know what I mean?
It's like salt's always at the bottom, and it's like important, really important.
Yeah,
and it's
even though it may not have like the sort of nobility that the other symbolic
like gold
things have, or Mercury and silver. It's still crucial.
Okay,
but hierarchically, it's kind of low down.
But necessary.
As far as like a noble type thing, you know.
Okay, but definitely necessary.
Oh, of course, yeah. Okay. It serves its purpose, which is what true hierarchy is, I guess. So
true.
So the salt is passive, restricted, imprisoned prima materia, and also the body. Evola writes later, quote, let us declare that man carries hermetically in his soul the presence of the solar and golden force. In his spirit, he carries that of the lunar and mercurial force. And finally, in the body, the force of salt is expressed, unquote. So there you go. Direct quote from Julius Evola. He also notes that salt, body, stone, and earth in the aspect of Hermetic symbolism are basically equivalent. Oswald Wirth, again, writes similarly that, quote, salt is at the base of all that takes form, unquote. And he describes it as the, quote, stabilizing principle of bodies, unquote. So it's kind of, it's crucial in its purpose, like what it does, being like the basis for the body and thus the work.
Okay.
Even though it may not be as important as what is the goal, you still need it to kind of bounce off of. It's like the ground that the rocket pushes off of.
Or like a puzzle. It's a piece of the puzzle. You need it.
That too.
You can't finish it without that piece. So, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So salt is kind of, whenever you kind of talk about salt, usually you come across niter as well. So with what we know of salt and its symbol, let's just explain niter and its actual symbol. So the actual symbol is a circle with a vertical line representing activity, splitting it into two halves. So it's basically the salt symbol rotated 90 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Oswald Wirth writes of the rotated salt symbol, quote, "It is no longer the symbol of a calm sagacity, but the ideogram of all revolts, starting with that of Lucifer," unquote.
Ooh.
So, yeah, that, well, I'll just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Evola writes some on the symbol itself in the Hermetic tradition, so the actual symbol. He says, quote, "There is a special alchemical symbol that is in part equivalent to the sun, quote, arsenic, unquote, which is explained by the Greek word arsenikon, meaning both arsenic and masculine or virile. Still another symbol is niter or saltpeter, whose ideogram indicated the predominance of a phallico-virile principle, i.e. the vertical line which cuts through the prima materia represented by the circle, unquote, all that. Evola also points out that the niter can express heat that activates the light, and active boiling virtue of the divine powers in opposition to Mercurius or sound. I don't really know what the sound is. Probably, I think it's like the waves. Evola doesn't say as much about niter as he does for salt, but for as much explanation and context as possible, I'll quote another small passage, not directly linked, but still just more on it, just like I said, for more context. Quote, "The Greek literature speaks of a virility or arsenic prepared with Egyptian niter. Niter again indicates the specifically masculine qualification of the spiritual energy, while the Egypt in these doctrines is often the equivalent symbol for the body and of such a force, niter, as is produced in the body," unquote. So it kind of almost seems like from that passive active, you can either bring in niter or you can convert your salt to niter to make you more active and solar and masculine and virile to sort of propel you into the next phases. It's kind of what it seems like he's saying of the alchemical transition from basically lead, salt, earth up into I think the next step would be mercury or silver or I'm sorry, sulfur, then mercury, silver, then gold, sun.
So you okay?
I'm pretty sure that's right. But we'll do another episode as well on like the color symbolism of the phases, probably.
Right. Yeah, because there's definitely the colors associated with it, like cinnabar, I think, is one.
Yeah, cinnabar. Yeah,
So,
which that's even Evola's
talked about that
autobiography
already.
is called The Path of Cinnabar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've mentioned that in an
Yeah.
episode for sure. I remember that.
So we'll definitely have to get into that.
So that basically wraps it up for just Salt and Niter, but I do have just another interesting thing, somewhat related, about just mere symbols that just kind of help us, again, since we now understand what the building blocks of these symbols are and what they mean and how they work, we can sort of intuit further meanings, and so I just want to provide some examples. So Wirth notes that the superposition of the symbol of salt, so the horizontal one, over the symbol for niter, the vertical, makes the ideogram for earth, the circle with the cross in it, as we just described in our previous episode. So you have the circle with the cross cutting it into quadrants. From here, there are three other symbols we can mention, the meaning of which will seem pretty intuitive to us now since we understand how the cross, circle, horizontal, and vertical lines work. We have the symbol representing the animal, like animal state or aspect, which is the earth symbol with the left side of the horizontal bar missing. So you would just have out of the center, you'd have the vertical line and then only the right side of the horizontal one.
Okay.
So this represents instability, which is kind of plain to see, but it's instability caused by an excess of activity, as the vertical active bar has dominance within the prima materia. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that's the animal. And then the vegetal is just the earth symbol, because, as you went over in our last episode, all of the arms of the cross are present, representing equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that center, there's a power, like
fire.
Yeah.
As I put it.
Yeah, or the quintessence, as I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So And then there's the mineral, which we could all probably guess what it is at this point, but it's the earth symbol with the bottom part of the vertical line missing, which represents stability by an excess of passivity, as the horizontal passive bar has dominance in the prima materia. So I just thought that was really interesting and worth including. That goes on a little bit more of something called a vitriol, which we can probably do something about, perhaps. Yeah. But I was kind of thinking next, since we've gone over the cross, we've mentioned the important tripartite thing, we know about the sun and moon, and we are always mentioning Mercury. We should probably maybe move to sulfur and Mercury. If we find that there's too much to say about both, we can do an episode of sulfur and an episode of Mercury.
Yeah.
Because we're going to try, I think, maybe to keep these down to a half hour.
Yeah, that's
Just, you know what I mean?
nice,
'Cause,
even.
yeah. It may be 40, 45 if necessary.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
that would be max, though. We wouldn't sit here for an
Yeah.
hour talking about it. But we definitely, I agree, we need to talk about sulfur and mercury because it keeps coming up. And we haven't talked about it at all. So,
that's really all I have. Did you have another sort of pitch you wanted to mention?
Yeah, so
for a future episode idea?
So in a future episode, because I was talking about, and I don't know how far into the future, but I was talking about, salt and spirits and the spirituality and all of that. I just wanted to talk about a certain friend of mine, a really good friend of mine. I'm not going to say her name. We'll call her SB.
Okay.
SB.
Oh, so it's almost like she's BS.
No. Oh, man, Joe.
Symbolic inversion or reversal there.
I like it.
All right.
So, yeah, but we'll call her SB. And she herself has told me that she has had a lot of spiritual connections, a lot of interesting things happen to her. She said that she's experienced a lot of paranormal activity, I suppose you can say.
Okay.
Everywhere she's been. There was a home that she was in where I guess, I don't know the home, I don't know where it was, I wouldn't even say if I knew, where she would experience these things. And she also said that she would be able to feel certain energies off of people, and she would be able to gauge people based on these energies that she would felt. And I asked her to describe it, and she said that she really couldn't. It was a really weird feeling. She said like a wave of exhaustion would come over her when she would feel these certain things. And I don't know what that means.
Well, that's that lunar stuff.
That's what I'm saying.
We've spoken of. Yeah.
We're always talking about how women are lunar and how they're... Well, we haven't really talked, but we've talked about that. But women are more, it seems to be...
Well, that's the feminine aspect.
Yeah, connected to this sort of thing. So she told me that, she gets very strange vibe, and she has premonitions because of this, I suppose. And we'll probably talk about this in the future, too, in her dreams.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Dreams, yeah.
And within her dreams, she said that there was a story she told me that she had a dream about a very specific car and a very specific person getting into a car crash and somebody dying. And she remembers waking up and thinking that was really, really strange and very specific, because it wasn't just...
like just some like dream furnishings.
Exactly.
Like, here's a car.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it was a specific car, and she was like, that was weird. That felt really weird and off. And apparently, like a week later, one of her good friends, her grandmother got into a car accident, died. And then her friend went to show her these photos of her grandma, because she's like, at the funeral, because they were getting together like the photos that they put at like a funeral or a wake. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a memory board sort of deal.
Yeah.
She was looking at the photos and she goes, "Oh my God, that's the car in my dream."
Premonition in dreams.
Yeah, that's the car. That's the person, and just stuff like that. And that was a really broad and admittedly poor description on my part of what she told me.
Okay.
Because it was a lot. And with that being said, that's why I like to... Premonitions. She has premonitions. She feels energy, and she gets certain vibes from certain situations. And she thinks, something bad's going to happen. It normally does.
Uh-oh.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
So with that being said, she will eventually, I hope, be on the podcast, and she can elaborate herself.
Yeah, and I'm thinking... Yeah, we can... All these sort of like side ideas, I think those would be good for when we sort of... Either, well, if time allows, like if she can just do it, we'll do it. Mm-hmm. But if once we kind of start wrapping up with like the actual symbols to where we think we've explained as much of them as possible, when we need to like sort of just dive in and do more research just on the art and the more difficult stuff to explain, it could be a nice time where like we could put out some like more, episodes like that, like topical stuff, to just allow us more time to research. Stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. I just wanted to throw that out there though, that we will try to get people on here like that who have experiences within alchemy or within the occult side or spiritual. We would like to have people.
Yeah, and we can. I mean, if people, you could reach out too, and we can try to hook up something where we can have like interviews with people. We said in episode 1 we're open to having interviews with people right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we'll even take like typed, I guess you could say, forms of like explanations.
Yeah, leave a comment or whatever if you want.
And we'll definitely talk about it and give our personal insight into it.
Yeah, and this is, we're just getting into this whole thing, but this podcast, it's still kind of taking shape. We're trying to get the symbols down, and we have a structure for that. But, we do plan on doing a whole lot more stuff. We plan on doing this podcast for a long time, too. So it'll keep going and growing. So we'll be we're talking about setting up a website, maybe like a blog, too. So we'll have an email address and all that probably soon enough, too. And then we'll start, so whatever. Reach out to us if you have a question, suggestion, correction, as they always say. You know what I mean?
Right. So, with all that being said, that was episode 5 of Arcanum Theurgy. I'm Dan Rasanowski.
Joe Schaefer.
And thanks once again for tuning in, listening, and you guys take care. Thank you.